Hey everyone, hope you're doing great. Welcome back to my channel. In today's video, we'll dive into what if Deku turned against all heroes to become the final villain. Smash that subscribe button, and be sure to peek at the description below. Let's begin. The sun was a brilliant, optimistic gold over Mizudafu, the kind of morning that felt manufactured for postcards. It was a day that promised peace, a day where the sky itself seemed to smile. For the pro-hero Deku, it was just another Tuesday. His boots crunched on the asphalt, the sound barely audible over the roaring inferno that was once the Mizudafu Chemical Dynamics plant. Acrid black smoke billowed into the pristine blue sky, a cancerous stain on a perfect morning. Firefighters aimed powerful jets of water at the base, but the chemical nature of the blaze made it a wild, unpredictable beast. This was where the heroes came in. Uravity, status on the West Wing evacuation. Deku's voice, amplified by his mass comm system, was calm and commanding. It was a voice that had matured far beyond the nervous stammer of his youth, now carrying the weight of the number 3 pro-hero ranking, a position he had secured at the unprecedented age of 20. All clear, Deku, came Ochiko Uraraka's cheerful reply. We have the last of the office staff accounted for. Ingenium is coordinating their transport to the triage zone. Copy that, Deku said, his eyes, a vibrant and determined green, scanning the chaos. He wasn't just looking, he was analyzing, processing 1,000 variables a second: air pressure, structural integrity, wind direction, the panic shouts of the first responders. His mind was a supercomputer powered by a hero's heart. With a surge of green energy that crackled around him like a personal lightning storm, he crouched. One for all, full cowling, 45%. The power was a comfortable thrum beneath his skin now, an extension of his own being. He launched himself into the air, a green comet against the black smoke. Float. The quirk of Nana Shimura lifted him effortlessly. From his vantage point, he could see the entire scene. He spotted it instantly, a section of the roof over the primary mixing vat was groaning, about to give way. If it fell, it would rupture the vat, releasing a cloud of neurotoxin that would make the fire look like a campfire. Ingenium! Deku barked into the comms. Widen the perimeter by another 500 meters, now! The primary vat is at risk of breach. Tenya Ida's voice was an instant, clipped response. Understood. Executing immediately. The silver and blue hero was a blur of motion on the ground, his engines roaring as he directed civilians and police with unparalleled efficiency. Deku didn't wait. He angled his body downwards. Tendrils of pure, black energy erupted from his arms. Black whip, they shot out like living things, wrapping around the groaning support beams of the compromised roof. He gritted his teeth, muscles straining as he took the weight of a dozen tons of steel and concrete onto his own body. I've got it stabilized. He grunted, his feet finding purchase on the side of the building. But it won't hold for long. We need to cool that vat. He was a symbol in motion. The public, held back by police lines, watched in awe. News helicopters circled like vultures, their cameras zoomed in on the lone green figure holding a building together with sheer force of will. On screens across the nation, news anchors spoke in reverent tones. In another incredible display, the pro-hero Deku once again proves why he is considered the true successor to All Might, one commentator said, her voice filled with admiration. Look at him. The power is undeniable, but it's that unwavering spirit, that absolute refusal to let anyone get hurt, that makes him the symbol of hope for our generation. On the ground, a child held up a brand new Deku action figure, his eyes wide. Deku saw it, even from 100 feet up. He allowed himself a small, confident smile, the smile he had practiced for years in the mirror, the one that mirrored his idols. It was a smile that said, "It's okay now." Why? Because I am here. With a final, explosive burst of power from FA gene that he had stored in his legs, he propelled himself forward, using the momentum to swing the entire collapsing roof section away from the building. It crashed harmlessly into the empty parking lot with a deafening roar. In the same fluid motion, he landed beside the firefighters. Now! He commanded, and they unleashed everything they had. An hour later, the fire was out. The plant was a smoking ruin, but every single employee was safe. Not a single casualty. Deku stood with Uraraka and Ida, his costume singed and covered in soot. He was taking a swig of water when his agency handler's voice crackled in his ear. "Good work out there, Deku. The press is calling it a perfect rescue. The HPSC is pleased. Head back to the agency, you've got a mountain of paperwork waiting." Deku sighed softly. The paperwork. The press conferences. The brand endorsements. It was all part of the job, the machinery that kept Heroes Society running. He understood its necessity, but it always felt peripheral. The only thing that truly mattered was the moment of the rescue, the look of relief on a person's face when they knew they were safe. That was the core of it all. That was the ideal he clung to. "You okay, Deku-kun?" Uraraka asked, her helmet off, her brow furrowed with concern. "You seem a little distant." "Just tired, Achiko-chan," he lied with a smile. "Thinking about that paperwork. Let's head back." As they walked away from the scene, the adoring cheers of the crowd followed them. Deku waved, the smile firmly in place. He was the symbol of hope. He saved people. It was a simple, pure truth. It was the only truth that mattered. He had no idea it was the last time he would ever believe in it. The first alert came through at 14:27. A high-level villain attack at the Tokyo Sky Egg Tower. Endeavor and Hawks were the first to respond. At 14:29, a second alert. A coordinated hostage situation across 3 of the city's largest banks. Best Jeanist and Edshot's agencies were deployed. At 14:32, the city's transportation network ground to a halt. A villain with a powerful EMP-like quirk had disabled the central train hub, while another with a geological quirk was collapsing highway overpasses. It was an invasion. Deku, Uraraka, and Ida had just reached their agency building when the general alarm blared, a piercing shriek that signaled a citywide crisis. The main monitor in the command center was a terrifying map of Muzurifu, blinking with dozens of red alerts. "What is this?" Ida demanded, his hands already chopping the air in agitation. "It's coordinated," a tactical officer said, her face pale. "They're hitting infrastructure, communications, and high population centers all at once. We've never seen anything on this scale. It's like a military operation." A new group had emerged from the shadows, calling themselves the Hegemony. Intelligence was non-existent. Their foot soldiers were disciplined, their quirks were varied, and their leaders were ghosts. They were not screaming for chaos or money. They were executing a plan with terrifying precision. "Deku! Uravity! You're with me!" A senior hero shouted. Massive fire reported at Muzurifu General Hospital. Intel suggests it was an incendiary attack. They're targeting the most vulnerable. Deku's blood ran cold. A hospital. Of all the targets, it was the most craven, the most evil. "Let's go!" he yelled, his earlier fatigue vanishing, replaced by a cold, righteous fury. The scene at the hospital was a vision of hell. The building's modern glass and steel facade was shattered, with flames licking out from a dozen different floors. The screams were the worst part. They were a constant, harrowing symphony of pain and terror. Heroes were already on the scene, minor local heroes, a few sidekicks, but they were completely overwhelmed. "They're not just burning it," Uraraka said, her voice trembling as she made a section of falling debris weightless. "They're actively collapsing the support structures. They want the whole building to come down." Deku didn't hesitate. He became a blur of green lightning, a one-man rescue operation. He used Black Whip to create nets, catching falling civilians. He used his raw strength to punch through walls, pulling people from smoke-filled rooms. He was everywhere at once, a whirlwind of desperate heroism. He pulled a nurse and 2 toddlers from a burning pediatrics ward, their small faces streaked with soot and tears. He carried an elderly man on his back from the collapsing ICU. For every person he saved, he could hear the screams of a dozen more he couldn't reach. The comms were a cacophony of panicked voices from all over the city. "Endeavor to command. The Sky Egg is rigged with explosives. We're trying to disarm, but we are pinned down. This is Fat Gum. They breached the city's reservoir. They're trying to poison the water supply. We need backup at the port. They're sinking cargo ships to block the harbor." The city was bleeding from 1,000 cuts, and there weren't enough heroes to apply pressure to them all. Deku grit his teeth and pushed harder, diving back into the inferno. He could feel the immense power of one for all coursing through him, a legacy of saviors demanding he do more, be better, save them all. He was in the middle of pulling a family out of a trapped elevator shaft when the voice came over the hero-wide priority channel. It was the cold, emotionless voice of the president of the Hero Public Safety Commission, all S-rank and A-rank heroes. This is a directive from the HPSC. Disengage from your current assignments immediately. A hegemony strike team has been confirmed at the HPSC Public Records Bureau, codename Aegis. I repeat, Aegis is under direct assault. Deku froze, a young girl in his arms. Aegis. He knew what that was. The most secure data vault in Japan. It contained the real identities of every undercover hero, the locations of their families, the names of every civilian informant, every witness protection program participant. If it fell, the entire hero network would be decapitated. The villains would have a kill list with thousands of names on it. A hero near him, a man with a water creation quirk, paused his efforts. Command, you can't be serious. Musudafu General is on the verge of total collapse. There are hundreds of people still inside. Patients, doctors, newborn babies in the NICU. The president's voice returned, devoid of any warmth. We have run the projections. The loss of life at Musudafu General is tragic, but the loss of Aegis would cripple national security and result in a cascading failure of the hero system across the country. The projected loss of life in that scenario is exponentially higher. The choice is strategically clear. Protect Aegis. That is an order. The logic was brutal. It was cold. It was a numbers game. A sacrifice of the few to save the many, and to Izuku Midoriya, it was the most profane thing he had ever heard. He watched in disbelief as other heroes began to disengage. Some looked tormented, their faces etched with guilt, but they obeyed. They were soldiers following orders. They turned their backs on the burning hospital and the people trapped inside, and they sped away towards a building full of data. Deku-kun, we have to go, Uraraka said, her voice thick with unshed tears. Ida stood beside her, his body rigid with conflict, but his face was set with the grim determination of someone who understood duty. Deku slowly lowered the girl he was holding, handing her to a paramedic. He turned his head, looking at his friends, then back at the groaning, dying building. He could still hear the screams. He could feel the vibrations of the structure as it slowly tore itself apart. No, he whispered. What? Ida asked, taking a step closer. Deku's voice rose, cracking with raw, unfiltered fury. No! He slammed his fist into the ground, cracking the pavement. He turned to face his friends, his green eyes blazing with a light they had never seen before, not of hope, but of pure, unadulterated rage. He keyed his own calm to the priority channel, his voice booming across the network, a furious rebuttal to the cold logic of the HPSC. Are you listening to yourselves? He roared, his voice shaking. You're heroes. We're heroes. Our job isn't to protect data. It isn't to make strategic choices. Our job is to save people. It's the only job. You're telling us to let them die? To stand here and listen to them burn while we go and save a computer server? Midoriya, stand down. The president's voice warned. This is a direct order. You are endangering the entire system. This is the system. Deku screamed back, a single tear cutting a clean path through the soot on his cheek. And it's rotten. It's a lie. We tell them go beyond, plus ultra. We tell them I am here. What a joke. What does it all mean if it ends with us running algorithms on human lives? I will not be a part of it. I will not abandon them. He turned his back on his friends. He could see the conflict in their eyes, the pain. Uraraka reached a hand out. Izuku. He didn't look back. Go, he said, his voice dropping to a low, dangerous growl. Follow your orders. With a sound like a thunderclap, he activated full cowling at a higher percentage than he had ever used for sustained movement. He shot towards the hospital, a lone green missile of defiance. He was going to save them. He had to. He would prove them all wrong. He would show them what a true hero was. He was too late. He was faster than a bullet, stronger than steel, but he was only one man. The hegemony's plan had been perfect. They hadn't just set fires. They had planted seismic charges on the core support pillars in the sub-basement. As Deku re-entered the building, a series of muffled, deep-throated explosions shook the very foundations of the earth. The world turned into a nightmare of sound and motion. The floor beneath him gave way. He used float to stay airborne, grabbing a doctor and a patient as the ceiling came down. Black whips shot out, anchoring him to a still-standing section of the outer wall as he swung them to a shattered window and pushed them out, where Uraraka, who had disobeyed her own heart to follow orders for a few seconds before turning back, caught them with her quirk. But the building was dying. It was a cascade failure. Floors pancaked on top of each other. A wave of concrete and steel rushed towards him. He unleashed a Delaware smash, the force of the compressed air obliterating the immediate threat but doing nothing to stop the macro collapse. He was in the heart of the NICU. He could see the incubators, the tiny, fragile lives within. A nurse was trying desperately to shield them with her own body. He wasn't going to make it. He knew it. With a desperate, primal scream, he used every quirk at once. Black whip wrapped around the incubators, float attempted to lessen their weight, and he braced himself, preparing to take the full impact of the collapsing floor above. He saw the nurse's face, her eyes wide with terror, her mouth forming the word thanks. Then the world went black. When he came to, it was to a profound and terrifying silence. The air was thick with dust, so dense it was like breathing sand. It clogged his throat and burned his eyes. He was pinned, his body aching with a pain so deep it felt like it had settled in his bones. He pushed. Concrete and rebars shifted around him. Slowly, painfully, he dug himself out. He stood up, his body a canvas of bruises and cuts, his costume torn to shreds. He was in a crater. A tomb. What was once a 12-story hospital was now a mountain of rubble and twisted metal, 3 stories high. The screaming had stopped. That was the worst part. The silence. It was an absolute, damning silence that spoke of a failure so complete, so catastrophic, that there were no words for it. He stumbled through the ruins, his legs unsteady. "Hello?" he called out, his voice hoarse. "Is anyone there?" Only the wind answered, whistling through the jagged steel skeletons of the dead building. He fell to his knees. The dust was settling, and the harsh afternoon sun cast long, grim shadows over the wreckage. He had saved a few. Maybe a dozen. Maybe 2. He had seen them get clear, but how many were in the building? 500? 1,000? He looked at the mountain of debris around him, and all he could see were gravestones. His hand, trembling, brushed against something in the dust. It was small and hard. He picked it up. It was a plastic action figure of All Might, in his classic Silver Age costume, fists on his hips, a permanent, indomitable smile carved onto his face. The paint was scuffed, and the cape was bent. It was a well-loved toy, and its small, plastic hand was still being held. Deku's eyes followed the grip. The toy was clutched in the small, dust-covered fingers of a child, no older than 6. The rest of the body was buried beneath a massive slab of concrete. All he could see was the hand, the toy, and a sleeve of a brightly colored t-shirt. He stared at it. The symbol of everything he had ever wanted to be, clutched in the hand of someone he had failed to save. The parallel was a physical blow, a shard of ice piercing his very soul. He remembered being that child, clutching that same toy, looking up at a screen and dreaming of a hero who could save everyone with a smile. He had the power. He had more power than All Might ever did. And he had failed. The system had failed. The very idea of heroism had failed. The smile. The promise. "It's okay now." It was all a lie. He let out a sound that was not a cry, not a scream, but a raw, broken exhalation of utter despair. He knelt there in the graveyard of his ideals, the dust of the dead clinging to him like a shroud. He looked down at the All Might figure, at the child's hand, and then up at the uncaring, empty sky. The vibrant, hopeful green in Izuku Midoriya's eyes flickered, wavered, and then extinguished completely. In its place was something cold, something hard, something utterly empty. The light had gone out. The symbol of hope was dead, buried under the weight of a necessary sacrifice. And in the ruins of his heart, something new, something terrible began to stir. The world outside was a cacophony of sirens and frantic news reports, but within the sterile, white walls of the HPSC emergency debriefing room, there was only a clinical, humming silence. Izuku Midoriya sat on a medical cot, a thin blanket draped over his shoulders. A nurse had cleaned the gash on his forehead and bandaged his arm, but he hadn't registered her touch. He hadn't said a word. His gaze was fixed on the massive television screen dominating the opposite wall, his soot-stained face a mask of stone. On the screen, the president of the Hero Public Safety Commission stood at a podium, her expression a masterclass in practiced solemnity. Behind her, a graphic displayed the logo of the hegemony with a bold red defeated stamped across it. And while the loss of life at Muzurifu General Hospital is a profound tragedy, she said, her voice resonating with false empathy, we must also acknowledge the catastrophic alternative. The hegemony's primary objective was the acquisition of the Aegis database. Had they succeeded, the identities of thousands of our undercover heroes and civilian assets would have been compromised, leading to a wave of targeted assassinations that would have shattered our nation's hero network. Thanks to the swift, decisive action of our top heroes, that outcome was averted. The hegemony's leadership has been neutralized, and their network is being dismantled as we speak. Someone in the press pool shouted a question. What about the pro-hero Deku? He defied a direct order and remained at the hospital. Was his insubordination a factor in the high casualty rate? The president's face tightened for a fraction of a second before relaxing back into its placid mask. The pro-hero Deku acted with his characteristic and admirable passion. His efforts were valiant, if ultimately misguided. In high-pressure crisis situations, emotional responses can sometimes cloud strategic judgment. The HPSC will be conducting a full review, but for now, we honor his bravery, just as we mourn the necessary sacrifice made at the hospital today. Necessary sacrifice. The words echoed in the hollow space where Izuku's soul used to be. He watched the screen, watched them spin his failure, their failure, into a victory. They spoke of the hospital casualties as a statistic, a footnote in the successful defense of a hard drive. They called his desperate attempt to uphold the very first tenet of heroism misguided. The nurse approached him again. Midoriya-san? We need to run a full diagnostic. You were at the epicenter of a structural collapse. He didn't turn his head. His voice, when it finally emerged, was a dry, rasping whisper, torn from a throat raw with dust and despair. Did you know, he began, his eyes still locked on the screen, that the human ear can continue to process sound for several minutes after clinical death? Even when the heart stops, the brain is still firing. They can still hear you. The nurse stared at him, confused and concerned. I don't understand. The screaming, he clarified, his voice flat and devoid of all emotion. It didn't stop all at once. It faded. One by one. I was buried under there, and I could hear them. I could hear them dying. He finally turned his head, and the nurse flinched. The emptiness in his eyes was a physical force, a void that seemed to suck the light out of the room. Tell me, he said, his voice dropping even lower, which one of those was a necessary sacrifice? She had no answer. She took a step back, her medical training utterly useless in the face of a wound so deep it couldn't be seen. A door opened, and two figures entered. The first was Endeavor, his hero costume scorched, his face a grim mask of exhaustion and authority. The second was a painfully thin, skeletal man in an oversized suit, Toshinori Yagi. All might. Young Midoriya, Toshinori began, his voice gentle. Endeavor cut him off. Leave us, he commanded the medical staff. They scurried out, eager to escape the suffocating atmosphere. The door clicked shut, leaving the three of them in the sterile white room. For a long moment, nobody spoke. Endeavor stared at Izuku, his turquoise eyes narrowed in appraisal. Toshinori looked at his successor with an expression of profound, heartbreaking pity. Izuku was the first to speak, his voice still a deadened monotone. You saw the broadcast. A perfect victory. He let out a short, bitter huff of air that wasn't a laugh. Congratulations. This is not a time for sarcasm, kid, Endeavor growled, his voice a low rumble. You disobeyed a direct command from the HPSC. You're lucky you're not facing immediate suspension and a tribunal. A tribunal for what? Izuku asked, his head tilting slightly. For trying to be a hero? For being a fool? Endeavor shot back, taking a step forward. You think you're the only one who had to make a hard choice today? I was at the Sky Egg. It was rigged to detonate with enough force to level 10 city blocks. I had to choose between cutting the green wire or the blue wire, knowing that if I chose wrong, thousands would die. Hawks had to choose between stopping the villain with the EMP quirk and the one collapsing the freeways. This is the reality of the job at our level. It's a series of impossible choices. You don't get the luxury of saving everyone, so you choose to save data, Izuku countered, his voice rising, a spark of the old fire returning, twisted into something colder and sharper. You choose to save a system. And you let people burn. A hospital full of the sick, the elderly, and the newborn. That was your impossible choice? Toshinori stepped between them, placing a placating hand on Endeavor's arm. Enji, please. He turned to Izuku, his face a portrait of sorrow. My boy, listen to me. What the president said, she was right in her own way. The Aegis database, if that list of names got out. I know what would have happened, Izuku interrupted, standing up from the cot. He was taller than Toshinori now, and the shadow he cast seemed to swallow his mentor's frail form. I also know that a hero is supposed to be the one who smashes through those impossible choices. The one who finds a way to save everyone. Isn't that what you taught me? Isn't that the promise you made to the world for 40 years? I am here. It wasn't I am here to protect critical infrastructure. It was I am here to save you. All of you. He took a step closer to Toshinori, his voice dropping to an intense, accusatory whisper. You stood on rooftops and you smiled. You told everyone that everything would be okay. And we believed you. I believed you. Was that all it was? A branding exercise? A hollow promise to keep the masses calm while the real decisions were being made by accountants in a back room? Toshinori flinched as if struck. The words hurt more than any physical blow from All for One. Izuku, no, it's not like that. It's more complicated. Is it? Izuku pressed, his gaze unwavering. Or is it simpler? You got old. You got weak. And you bought into the system you were once powerful enough to stand above. You all did. You're not symbols of peace anymore. You're brand managers for a for-profit security corporation that's traded its soul for a stable stock price. That's enough, Endeavor warned, his fists beginning to smolder. But it was Toshinori who delivered the final, fatal blow. He looked his successor in the eye, his own gaze filled with a weary, tragic acceptance that Izuku found more repulsive than any lie. We can't save everyone, my boy. The sentence was quiet. It was meant to be comforting, a release from the impossible burden of being a perfect hero. But to Izuku, it was the ultimate betrayal. It was the gospel of heroism being renounced by its greatest prophet. It was All Might himself admitting that the dream was dead. Izuku stared at him for a long, silent moment. The last flicker of the hero-worshipping child in his heart died, and the ashes grew cold. I see, he said, his voice utterly flat. He turned away from them, walking towards the door. Where are you going? Toshinori asked, his voice laced with panic. He reached out, his bony hand about to touch Izuku's shoulder. Izuku stopped, but didn't turn. Don't, he said, the single word sharp enough to cut. Toshinori's hand fell back to his side. You're not heroes, Izuku stated, his voice as cold and clear as glass. You're managers of an acceptable casualty rate. And I will have no part in it. He opened the door and walked out, leaving the number 1 and former number 1 heroes standing in a silence more profound than the one he'd woken up to in the rubble. The walk back to his apartment was a blur. He moved through the still chaotic city streets like a ghost. People recognized him. Some pointed, some whispered. A few brave souls approached him. Deku, you were amazing, one said. Thank you for trying, said another. Their words were meaningless, hollow echoes from a world he no longer belonged to. He didn't respond, his expression unchanging, his eyes fixed on a point in the distance that no one else could see. His apartment was in the Heights Alliance building, a top-floor suite befitting his hero rank. He bypassed the common areas, ignoring the worried calls of his friends and former classmates. He didn't have the energy to lie, and he no longer had any interest in telling them the truth. He keyed in the code, and the door slid open. The apartment was his sanctuary, a place he had designed himself. It was also a museum dedicated to a dead god. All Might was everywhere. A massive, smiling poster from the Silver Age dominated one wall. His bedsheets were the classic red, white, and blue. A glass display case held a collection of rare All Might action figures, each one in a dynamic, heroic pose. The All Might alarm clock on his nightstand still had the same booming, cheerful voice programmed into it. "I am here, to tell you to wake up." He looked at it all, at the relics of his own childish faith, and felt a wave of profound nausea. The confident smile on the posters no longer looked heroic. It looked like the grotesque, fixed grin of a corpse. It was the smile of a liar. A promise breaker. He walked past the memorabilia without a second glance. He went to his closet and pulled out a simple, unmarked black duffel bag. He began to pack, his movements economical and precise. He packed 3 sets of dark, functional clothing. A medical kit. Burner phones. A large quantity of cash he kept for emergencies. A set of lockpicks. A multi-tool. There was no sentimentality in his choices. He was packing for a mission, not a trip. He paused, his hand hovering over a framed picture on his dresser. It was of him, Uraraka, and Ida, taken just after they had all received their pro licenses. They were grinning, full of hope and promise. He stared at his own smiling face in the photo, at the bright, naive light in his eyes. He felt like he was looking at a stranger. A dead stranger. He left the picture where it was. His final stop was his desk. His Pro Hero license sat in its stand, a proud testament to his life's work. License number 1888. Name, Midoriya Izuku. Hero name, Deku. The photo was of him in his gamma costume, giving a determined thumbs up. It was a symbol of his entry into the world he had dreamed of, a contract with the society he had sworn to protect. He picked it up. The plastic was hard and unyielding. He held it in both hands, his thumbs pressing against the center. He thought of the child's hand in the rubble, clutching a toy. He thought of the president's sanitized, political lies. He thought of Endeavor's cold, brutal logic. He thought of Toshinori's defeated eyes and the 6 hollow words that had shattered his world. "We can't save everyone, my boy." With a sharp, cracking sound that echoed in the silent apartment, the license snapped in two. The smiling face of the hero Deku was fractured, split down the middle. He carefully placed the 2 broken pieces on the smooth surface of the desk, side by side, a final, definitive statement. A resignation. Then, with the black duffel bag slung over his shoulder, he walked out of the apartment, leaving the door unlocked behind him. He didn't look back. An hour later, a frantic knocking came at the door. "Deku-kun? Are you in there?" "It's us." Achiko Uraraka's voice was tight with worry. Beside her, Tenya Ida stood ramrod straight, though his own concern was evident in the tense set of his jaw. "We heard what happened at the debriefing. We just want to make sure you're alright." There was no answer. "This is highly unusual," Ida stated. "Midoriya-kun always responds. Perhaps he is asleep? The stress of the day must have been immense." "I don't know," Ida-kun, Uraraka whispered. "I have a bad feeling." She tried the handle. It was unlocked. The door slid open into darkness. "Deku-kun?" The air inside was still and cool, stale with absence. The only light came from the hallway behind them, casting long shadows that made the All Might memorabilia look like ancient, forgotten idols in a tomb. "Midoriya-kun?" Ida called out, stepping inside and activating the lights. The apartment was pristine. Nothing was out of place. It was too pristine. It looked less like a home and more like a hotel room that had been vacated. Uraraka's eyes scanned the room, her heart sinking with every detail. The empty space in the closet where his travel bag should have been. The untouched photo on the dresser. Then she saw it. On the desk, illuminated by the overhead light, lay the 2 pieces of his hero license. "Oh no," she breathed, her hand flying to her mouth. Ida strode over, his eyes widening in shock and disbelief. "His license! It has been destroyed. This is a flagrant violation of HPSC regulations. More than that, it is a symbolic gesture of the highest order. What is he thinking? Uraraka wasn't listening to the regulations. She was seeing the broken photo, the severed name. It was a suicide note for a career, for a life stream. Tears welled in her eyes as the horrible, sinking feeling in her gut intensified. He wasn't just grieving. He had broken. As her tear-filled eyes scanned the desk, something else caught her attention. The desk chair was pushed in, but the computer monitor was on, its screen glowing with a soft, eerie light in the otherwise bright room. It seemed to draw them closer. They both leaned in, peering at the screen. It wasn't a suicide note or a letter of resignation. It was a program, a database of some kind. The interface was sleek, dark, and ruthlessly efficient. At the top of the screen was a single, chilling title, Project, Systemic Flaws. Below it was a list of names. Pro-heroes. Hundreds of them. Their own names were on the list. Uraraka's finger, trembling, reached out and clicked on the file labeled Dynamite Bakugo, Katsuki. The file that opened was not the familiar, messy scrawl of Izuku's childhood hero notebooks. There were no enthusiastic sketches or fanboyish praise. This was something else entirely. Cold, analytical, terrifyingly comprehensive. Subject: Katsuki Bakugo, dynamite, quirk, explosion. Secretion of nitroglycerin like sweat from palms, can be detonated at will. Physical weaknesses: over-reliance on right hand for primary AP shot attacks. Left side approach recommended. Auditory vulnerability. High-frequency sonics can disrupt concentration and inner ear balance, affecting mid-air maneuverability. Thermal dependency. Efficacy of quirk significantly reduced in low-temperature environments, below 0 degrees Celsius, due to sweat viscosity change. Optimal destabilization temperature for secreted sweat is -15 degrees Celsius. Psychological profile: pride-based complex. Responds aggressively to any perceived slight or suggestion of weakness. Can be goaded into reckless action by questioning his strength or victory. Latent inferiority/superiority complex regarding subject Izuku Midoriya. Use of the name Kaken by unauthorized individuals triggers an immediate, predictable rage response. Tactical blind spots. Tends to favor overwhelming offense, leaving him open to counterattacks that exploit his forward momentum. Lacks patience for protracted, defensive engagements. The entry went on, page after page of meticulous, terrifying detail. It analyzed his support gear, his fighting style, his patrol routes, even his known associates, and their potential as leverage. It wasn't hero analysis for the future. It was a blueprint for dismantling a hero, piece by piece. Uraraka scrolled back to the main list, her blood running cold. She clicked on her own name. It was just as detailed. Her quirk's weight limit, her nausea threshold, her psychological dependence on her friends, her deep-seated fear of being a burden. He knew all her secrets, all her fears, all her weaknesses. Ida stared at the screen, his face ashen. This is not analysis, he whispered, his voice shaking. This is targeting data. Uraraka looked around the room, at the smiling All Might posters, at the broken hero license, and then back at the screen full of cold, hard data. The kind, determined, crybaby friend who had saved her from a zero-pointer robot, who had bled and broken himself time and again to save others, was gone. The person who had created this database was someone else. Someone methodical. Someone cold. Someone who no longer saw heroes, only flaws in a system. And he was now somewhere out in the world, carrying a head full of their darkest secrets, and a heart full of broken promises. 6 months passed. 6 months of a gaping, unfillable void in the world of heroes. Izuku Midoriya's disappearance became the biggest story in the country, then a lingering mystery, then a sad, cautionary tale. The official narrative, carefully crafted by the HPSC, was that the young hero, suffering from severe post-traumatic stress after the Mizurufu tragedy, had retired from hero work and gone into seclusion to heal. It was a plausible, palatable lie. The public mourned the loss of their rising star, another bright light extinguished by the grim realities of the profession. His friends held on to a desperate hope that he was out there somewhere, finding peace. But the city of Muzurifu knew no peace. In the vacuum left by Deku's absence, the criminal underworld, emboldened by the hegemony's temporary disruption of the hero system, began to stir. New gangs fought for territory, a new brand of synthetic quirk-enhancing drug called overdrive flooded the streets, and corrupt officials, sensing a shift in the power dynamic, grew bolder in their dealings. The heroes, stretched thin and still reeling from their victory, struggled to keep a lid on the simmering pot. It was into this growing darkness that a new figure emerged. He was not a hero. He did not have a license, an agency, or a flashy costume. He was a ghost, a rumor whispered in the shadowed alleys where deals were made and lives were cheap. They called him Kage, the Shadow. Some, the ones he inadvertently saved, called him something else, the Savior. His methods were unlike anything the city had seen before. They were swift, silent, and terrifyingly efficient. He didn't engage in grand, destructive battles that leveled city blocks. He moved with the precision of a surgeon excising a tumor. The first major incident was the complete dismantling of the Ryujinkai, a Yakuza clan that had controlled the port district for decades. One night, they were the undisputed kings of the docks. The next morning, the police found the entire upper echelon of the clan, over 30 members, bound together in a shipping container, suspended upside down from a crane. They were unconscious but unharmed. Every single one of them was meticulously tied with a strange, black, rope-like substance that seemed to move with a life of its own. On a laptop left at the scene was a detailed, unassailable ledger of their every crime, from smuggling to human trafficking, complete with offshore bank accounts and the names of every HPSC official on their payroll. The scandal rocked the commission and led to a dozen arrests within the hero oversight body itself. The pro-heroes who had been investigating the Ryujinkai for years were left holding their breath, their lengthy, painstaking investigation rendered obsolete in a single night. Weeks later, the notorious sludge villain, a recurring B-lister known for his suffocating body and slippery escapes, was found encased in a perfect sphere of ice in the middle of a shopping mall. He was still conscious, his eyes wide with terror, but completely immobilized. Taped to the ice was a note detailing the location of his next planned robbery. A hero agency, long suspected of insurance fraud by inflating collateral damage reports, had its entire digital infrastructure wiped. The only file left on their servers was a single video, looped on every monitor in their headquarters. A recording of their director instructing his sidekicks to make sure you clip the gas main during a routine purse-snatching call to maximize the payout. The video was anonymously leaked to every major news network in Japan. The agency was disbanded in disgrace. The ghost of Muzurifu was always one step ahead. He knew patrol routes before they were finalized. He knew the weaknesses of villains who had only appeared once. He knew the dirty secrets of heroes who presented a flawless public image. He moved with an analytical grace and a ruthless efficiency that was both awe-inspiring and deeply unsettling. He never killed. He never even seemed to maim. His goal was not punishment, but exposure. Neutralization. He wasn't fighting crime. He was systematically dismantling the entire corrupt ecosystem of heroes and villains alike, cutting out the rot with a scalpel. The public was divided. To some, he was a dangerous vigilante, operating outside the law and undermining the very heroes sworn to protect them. But to a growing, disillusioned populace, he was something more. He was justice. He was the consequence that the system was too slow, too corrupt, or too incompetent to deliver. He was what the heroes were supposed to be, but weren't. Inside the newly established Joint Task Force headquarters dedicated to capturing this savior, the atmosphere was thick with frustration. The room was a mess of monitors, holographic maps, and pinboards connected by a spiderweb of red string. At the center of it all, slamming a fist on the main console, was Katsuki Bakugo. Damn it! He roared, the veins in his neck bulging. We're chasing a ghost. Every time we get a lead, he's already gone. Every trap we set, he walks right around it. It's like he's reading our playbook before we even write it. Now the number 4 pro hero, Great Explosion Murder God Dynamite, a name the HPSC had reluctantly approved after a lengthy and explosive negotiation. Bakugo had thrown himself into this case with a singular, obsessive fury. He worked around the clock, fueled by rage, caffeine, and a gnawing dread that he refused to acknowledge, even to himself. Across the table, Shoto Todoroki, cool and collected as ever, studied a holographic projection of the city. His movements are not random. He's methodical. Look, he traced a line across the map, connecting the locations of the Savior's strikes. He is targeting nodes. Financial centers for criminal organizations. Corrupt logistical hubs. Communication relays. He's not just taking out the players, he's dismantling the board itself. He's thinking 10 moves ahead. No shit, icy hot. Bakugo snapped, stalking around the table. The question isn't what he's doing, it's how. His intel is perfect. His timing is perfect. He fights with a combination of quirks we've never seen before. That black whip stuff, enhanced speed and strength, and some kind of danger sensing ability that makes ambushes impossible. And his analysis, it's flawless. Bakugo stopped, his crimson eyes narrowed. He muttered under his breath, the words a low, angry growl. Always muttering, always scribbling in those stupid notebooks, analyzing everyone, every quirk. Todoroki looked up, his heterochromatic eyes locking onto Bakugo's. The same unspoken fear hung between them, a ghost in the room more tangible than the one they were hunting. They both knew. They had known from the first incident. The analytical precision, the acrobatic, air-based fighting style augmented by black, energy-like tendrils, the intimate knowledge of both hero and villain weaknesses. There was only one person it could be. We cannot operate on unsubstantiated theories, Todoroki said, his voice carefully neutral, though it lacked its usual conviction. We need proof. Proof? Bakugo scoffed, a bitter, humorless smile twisting his lips. I don't need proof. I've been fighting him my whole damn life. I know him. His comm unit crackled to life. All units, we have a confirmed sighting. The Overdrive Drug Lab in the old Kamino Ward Industrial District. He's on site. Pro Hero Lemillion is engaging. A jolt went through the room. Kaminari, who was manning the comm station, swiveled in his chair. Mirio's there? He's one of the few people who could actually corner him. Bakugo was already moving. Get me a live feed. Everyone, saddle up. We're ending this tonight. He blasted out of the headquarters, his explosions propelling him into the sky, a furious comet streaking towards Kaminari. He had to be the one. He had to be the one to face him. He had to look him in the eye and see for himself if the hero he had tormented, envied, and finally, grudgingly respected, had truly become this thing. The Kaminari ward was a maze of rusted factories and derelict warehouses, a skeletal remnant of a bygone industrial age. Mirio Togata, the pro-hero Lemillion, moved through it like a phantom. His permeation quirk made him the perfect operative for this kind of environment, allowing him to phase through walls and floors, to appear and disappear at will. He had the savior cornered, or so he thought. He had tracked him to the main production floor of the drug lab. The place reeked of chemicals and ozone. Vats of the glowing green overdrive formula bubbled menacingly. The low-level thugs who ran the lab were already unconscious, piled in a neat, non-lethal heap in a corner. In the center of the room stood a lone figure. He was tall and lean, clad in a dark, tactical suit that was a perverse mockery of a hero costume. It was made of a matte black, non-reflective material, with subtle dark green accents along the arms and legs. A hood was pulled low over his face, casting it in shadow, and a black rebreather mask covered his lower jaw, distorting his voice. It's over, Lemillion said, his usually cheerful voice hard and serious. He stood, solid and imposing, blocking the only exit. You've made your point, whoever you are. But this has to stop. You're breaking the law. The hooded figure slowly turned. His head tilted, as if analyzing Mirio. The law, the figure repeated, his voice a low, digitally filtered rasp. The law that allowed this lab to operate for a year while heroes were busy with ribbon-cutting ceremonies? The law that allowed the Ryujinkai to sell children while the HPSC accepted their bribes? That law? The law isn't perfect, Mirio countered, shifting into a fighting stance. But it's what separates us from them. We work to fix the system from the inside. We don't burn it down. You can't fix a foundation that is rotten to the core, the figure stated, his voice devoid of heat. You can only build something new on the ashes. With no further warning, he moved. He was impossibly fast, a black blur that crossed the room in a heartbeat. Mirio reacted instantly, activating his quirk to let the attack phase through him, but the attack never came. The figure had fainted, using the motion to propel himself up to the rafters. Black, whip-like tendrils shot from his arms, anchoring him to the ceiling as he swung through the air with breathtaking agility. His quirk, it's more than just those whips, Mirio muttered, his eyes tracking the figure's movements. His speed, his strength, it's like he has multiple quirks. He phased through the floor, planning to reappear behind the vigilante for a surprise attack. It was his signature move, the Phantom Menace. It had never failed. This time it did. Just as Mirio was about to solidify, the figure, without even looking, dropped a small metal disc to the floor right where Mirio was about to emerge. The disc erupted in a blinding flash and an ear-splitting sonic shriek. Mirio materialized in a state of disorientation, his senses overloaded. Before he could recover, the black whip shot down, not to strike him, but to wrap around the bubbling vats of overdrive. With a grunt of immense effort, the figure tore them from their moorings and hurled them towards Mirio. Mirio's eyes widened. He could phase through the vats, but the thousands of gallons of volatile chemicals would splash across the room, and any spark could turn the entire warehouse into a crater. It was a perfect trap, forcing him to choose between his own safety and a catastrophic explosion. He didn't hesitate. He remained solid, bracing himself. He would have to take the hit. A split second before the vats would have crushed him, a massive explosion blew the warehouse doors off their hinges. "Get the hell away from him, you bastard!" Bakugo roared, flying into the room. An AP shot, concentrated and precise, struck the vats in midair, atomizing them. The chemicals were vaporized in a controlled blast, raining down as a harmless, inert mist. Bakugo landed in a crouch between Mirio and the hooded figure, his hands crackling with explosive energy. "So, the ghost finally decides to show his face," he snarled, his eyes locked on the shadowed hood. "Or are you gonna keep hiding like a coward?" Todoroki entered right behind him, a sheet of ice already spreading across the floor to prevent any easy escape. Other heroes began to surround the building. There was nowhere to run. The figure in the rafters remained silent, his body perfectly still. Bakugo could feel his gaze, the intense, analytical weight of it. It was a feeling he knew all too well. It was the feeling of being studied, measured, and disassembled in the mind of the one person who knew him better than anyone. "Take off the mask, Deku," Bakugo said, his voice dropping to a low, dangerous growl. "Stop hiding." The figure was silent for a moment longer. Then, slowly, his hands went up to his hood. He pulled it back. The face that was revealed was familiar, yet horribly wrong. It was Izuku Midoriya's face, but all the warmth, all the soft, hopeful light was gone. His freckled cheeks were leaner, his jawline harder. His green eyes, once vibrant and full of emotion, were now as cold and sharp as chips of emerald ice. A faint, jagged scar traced a path from his temple down to his cheek, a memento from the hospital collapse. There was no fear in his eyes. No anger. No sadness. There was only a chilling, absolute certainty. "Hello, Kaken," he said, his voice no longer filtered by the mask, but just as cold. The single word, the old childhood nickname spoken with such deadened finality, hit Bakugo harder than any punch. This wasn't the Deku who had chased after him, who had looked up to him, who had fought him with tears in his eyes. This was someone else. A stranger wearing his best friend's face. "What are you doing?" Bakugo demanded, his voice cracking slightly despite his effort to keep it steady. "What the hell is all this? You think you're some kind of dark knight? Cleaning up the city?" "I am a janitor," Deku replied calmly. "I am cleaning up a mess that you and your corrupt institution have allowed to fester for far too long. I am doing your job." "Our job is to save people," Mirio interjected, having recovered his senses. "Not to be judge, jury, and executioner." Deku's cold eyes flickered to Mirio. "You can't save people from a system that is designed to fail them. You can only patch the holes in a sinking ship. I'm not patching the holes. I'm building a new ship." He dropped from the rafters, landing silently on the icy floor. He didn't assume a fighting stance. He just stood there, his hands loose at his sides, an aura of untouchable confidence radiating from him. "It's over, Midoriya," Todoroki said, raising a hand as flames began to lick at his left side. "Surrender. We can still help you." Deku's lips curved into a slight, humorless smile. It was a terrifying sight. "Help me? Shoto, your father is a testament to the hero system's fundamental flaw, that strength is a virtue in and of itself, regardless of the soul who wields it. Mirio, your own quirk was taken and then returned, a pawn in a game far bigger than you. And you, Kaken, you're the ultimate proof. A bully, a sadist, a man who told me to take my own life, and society rewarded you for it. They polished your rage until it shone like a medal and called you a hero. You're not here to help me, you are the embodiment of the disease I am here to cure." Every word was a perfectly aimed dart, striking at the deepest insecurities of each hero present. Bakugo's control finally snapped. With a roar of pure, undiluted rage and pain, he launched himself forward. "I'll kill you!" He unleashed his most powerful move, the howitzer impact, a massive, swirling explosion designed for maximum destruction. Deku watched it come, his expression unchanging. At the last second, just as the explosion was about to consume him, he moved. He used FA gene, storing kinetic energy in his legs, and unleashed it in a single burst. He didn't dodge to the side. He shot forward, directly through the weakest point of the blast, the eye of the storm. He moved through the inferno, untouched, a ghost passing through fire. Bakugo's eyes widened in shock. No one had ever done that. Deku appeared right in front of him, inside his guard. His hand shot out, not in a punch, but in a precise, open-palmed strike. It wasn't aimed at Bakugo's face or chest. It was aimed at a specific point on his shoulder, a nerve cluster that Bakugo didn't even know existed. A jolt of paralyzing energy shot through Bakugo's right arm. His arm went limp, the muscles refusing to obey his commands. The crackling explosions from his palms sputtered and died. "Your reliance on your right arm for large-scale attacks is predictable," Deku said, his voice a calm whisper in Bakugo's ear. "You build up the pressure, slightly shifting your weight to your left foot to compensate for the recoil. It's a quarter-second till. More than enough time." He spun, his legs sweeping out and kicking Bakugo's legs out from under him. As Bakugo fell, Deku delivered another precise strike to the back of his neck, and the world went dark for the number 4 hero. He collapsed onto the ice, unconscious. Todoroki reacted instantly, unleashing a massive wave of fire, followed by a glacier of ice. Deku was a phantom. He used float to leap into the air, Black Whip shooting out to latch onto Todoroki's ice wall. He swung around it, landing behind his former friend. "You've learned to use both sides in tandem, Shoto," Deku observed, as if critiquing a sparring session. "But your emotional state still dictates your strategy. You lead with fire when you're angry, ice when you're defensive. Right now you're both. It's making you sloppy." Before Todoroki could turn, Deku used Danger Sense, a red flash of light in his mind warning him of Mirio phasing up from the floor behind him. Without looking, Deku stomped his foot down. A surge of one for all, controlled, precise, cracked the ice, creating a web of fissures. The unexpected instability of the ground caused Mirio to miscalculate his emergence, giving Deku the opening he needed. He spun, a black whip tendril snapping out and wrapping around Todoroki's ankle, yanking him off his feet. As Mirio solidified, Deku was already in motion, grabbing the still disoriented Lemillion and using his momentum to throw him directly into the falling Todoroki. The two heroes collided in a tangle of limbs. It was over in less than 10 seconds. 3 of the top pro heroes in the country, defeated without a single powerhouse punch. It wasn't a brawl, it was a dissection. He had taken them apart with their own weaknesses, using his encyclopedic knowledge against them. Deku stood over his fallen comrades, his expression unreadable. He looked down at Bakugo's unconscious face, the anger and pain still etched there even in sleep. For a fleeting instant, a flicker of something, regret, sadness, a memory of a different time, crossed his face. It was there and then it was gone, replaced by the cold, hard mask of certainty. Sirens wailed in the distance, growing closer. He knew he had minutes, maybe seconds, before the entire area was flooded with heroes. He pulled his rebreather back over his face, and his hood over his head. He turned and melted back into the shadows of the derelict factory from which he'd come. Before he disappeared completely, he spoke one last sentence, his filtered voice a chilling promise that hung in the cold air. The age of heroes is over, Kakin. It's time for salvation. The world was not aware that it was holding its breath. It was a perfectly ordinary Wednesday afternoon. In Tokyo, commuters packed onto trains, their faces illuminated by the glow of their phones. In New York, stockbrokers shouted on the trading floor. In London, families sat down for dinner. The global hum of mundane life was a constant, comforting rhythm. At 1700 hours Japan Standard Time, that rhythm broke. It began with a flicker. A wave of digital snow, a brief burst of static that washed over every screen on the planet. For a moment, people blinked, tapped their devices, and adjusted their television sets. Then, just as suddenly as it had appeared, the static coalesced. Every screen, from the colossal digital billboards in Shibuya Crossing to the tiny smartwatch on a jogger's wrist in Paris, from military command center monitors to the in-flight entertainment systems of airplanes cruising at 30,000 feet, flickered to life with the same image. It was a plain, dark green background, utterly blank. There was no network logo, no churn, no sound. There was only the unnerving, universal uniformity of the signal. It was a digital occupation, silent and absolute. In a hidden location, deep beneath the forgotten substructures of an abandoned municipal building, Izuku Midoriya watched a bank of monitors, his face illuminated by their emerald glow. The room was cold, Spartan, and ruthlessly functional. Wires snaked across the concrete floor like metallic vines, all leading to a central console where a young woman with neon-pink cybernetic goggles sat, her fingers flying across a holographic keyboard. Global network penetration at 100%, she reported, her voice calm and professional. She was no older than 20, a former support course prodigy from a rival hero school who had been expelled for unethical experimentation. Izuku had found her disillusioned and brimming with talent. He hadn't offered her power or riches, he'd offered her a purpose. He'd offered her a chance to break the system that had discarded her. Satellite uplinks are stable. We have total control. No signal can get in or out except ours. They're blind and deaf, sir. Excellent work, Glitch, Izuku said, his voice a quiet murmur that still managed to command the entire room. He stood before a single, high-definition camera. He was dressed in the same dark, tactical suit from his confrontation with Bakugo, but his hood and mask were off. His face was clean, his green hair neatly combed. He looked less like a vigilante and more like a young CEO about to deliver a somber corporate address. Begin the broadcast on my mark. He closed his eyes for a moment, not in prayer, but in focus. He reached inward, feeling the searing, sun-like core of One for All. He could feel the vestiges within, a maelstrom of confusion, anger, and sorrow. Ninth, what are you doing? This is madness. The voice of Daigoro Banjo, the fifth user, was a desperate shout in his mind. Please, boy, don't do this. Think of all the good you've done. Think of the people you've saved, Nana Shimura pleaded, her psychic voice trembling with a grandmother's grief. He didn't argue with them. He didn't reason. He simply clamped down. With a force of will that was now as strong as his quirk, he silenced their protests, pushing them deep into the background of his consciousness. He treated them not as mentors, but as errant lines of code in his own operating system. He was in control. The power was his, and his alone, to wield as he saw fit. He opened his eyes. The cold, empty certainty had returned. Mark, he said. In the Tanaka family's living room in the suburbs of Mizudafu, 10-year-old Akari stared at the television. Her favorite hero cartoon had been replaced by the strange green screen. Papa, the TV's broken. I see that, sweetie, her father said, fiddling with the remote. Probably just a broadcast interruption. Don't worry, your show will be back on. Just as he said it, the image changed. A young man with wild green hair and freckles appeared on the screen. He looked directly into the camera, his expression unnervingly calm. Akari gasped, her eyes widening with delight. It's Deku! Papa, it's Deku! She scrambled closer to the screen, her Deku-themed pajamas rustling. He was her favorite hero, even more than All Might. He was younger, kinder, his smile less like a booming proclamation and more like a gentle promise. Her father frowned. What's he doing? This isn't a news conference. Around the world, the same scene of recognition and confusion played out 1,000,000,000 times over. They knew that face. He was the symbol of hope, the prodigy, the hero who had vanished. And now, he was in their homes. Then he spoke. His voice was clear, calm, and carried a weight that seemed to suck the air out of every room he was broadcast into. Good afternoon, he began, as if starting a lecture. My name is Izuku Midoriya. Many of you knew me by the hero name Deku. At the task force headquarters, chaos erupted. Trace the signal. Now! A technician yelled. We can't! It's not a signal, it's everything. It's like the air itself is broadcasting him. Another screamed back, frantically typing at a dead console. Katsuki Bakugo, his right arm in a sophisticated medical brace, stood frozen in front of the main monitor. He stared at the face of the boy he grew up with, the boy he had just fought, now appearing as calm and collected as a news anchor after dismantling 3 top heroes. A low, guttural growl rumbled in his chest. What are you playing at, you damn nerd? He seethed. Uraraka and Ida stood nearby, their faces pale with shock and a dawning, terrible dread. Deku-kun. Uraraka whispered, her hands clasped together as if in prayer. What is he doing? In a small, quiet apartment near the UA campus, Toshinori Yagi sat in his worn armchair, a cup of tea growing cold in his hand. He had been watching a historical documentary when the screen had changed. Now, he stared at the face of his successor, his boy, and his heart felt like a lead weight in his hollow chest. He saw the coldness in Izuku's eyes, the rigid set of his jaw, and he knew. This was not a cry for help. This was a declaration. Oh my boy, he whispered to the empty room, his voice frail and broken. What have I done? 6 months ago, Izuku continued on the screen, his gaze unblinking, I was part of an operation to stop a terrorist organization called the Hegemony. During this operation, the heroes of this nation, under the direct order of the Hero Public Safety Commission, made a choice. They chose to abandon hundreds of civilians, including the sick and the newborn in Nizurifu General Hospital, to die in a collapsing, burning building. They chose to let them burn in order to protect a data server. He paused, letting the silence hang, letting his words sink in. He wasn't shouting. He was stating a fact. I was told this was a necessary sacrifice. A strategic choice for the greater good. These are pleasant words used by politicians and accountants to sanitize an atrocity. But I was there. I was in the rubble. I held the hand of a child my fellow heroes had deemed an acceptable loss. And in that moment, I realized a profound and terrible truth. He leaned slightly closer to the camera, and it felt as if he were looking into every single person's eyes individually. The system you call hero society is a lie. A wave of shock rippled through his global audience. In the Tanaka living room, Akari looked at her father, her brow furrowed in confusion. Papa, what's he saying? That's not true. Heroes save people. The very concept of the pro-hero is the foundation of this lie, Izuku's calm voice explained. It is a reactive, for-profit industry built not on the principle of salvation, but on the perpetuation of conflict. Think about it. A world without villains is a world without heroes. A world without conflict is a world where hero agencies go bankrupt. The entire hero economy, from merchandise and media rights to government subsidies and insurance payouts, is predicated on the existence of a perpetual enemy. He gestured dismissively with one hand. Heroes are not saviors. They are celebrities. They compete in rankings for fame and fortune. The stronger the villain they defeat, the higher their rank, the more lucrative their endorsement deals. The number one hero, Endeavor, is a man who built his career on a mountain of collateral damage and built his family on a foundation of abuse, all in the obsessive pursuit of a title, and your society celebrated him for it. You bought his merchandise. You watched his interviews. You rewarded his ambition, and you ignored his corruption. In the task force room, Todoroki clenched his fists, his knuckles turning white. He didn't look angry, he looked profoundly sad, because he knew that what Izuku was saying, in its own twisted way, contained a shard of undeniable truth. And what of the greatest hero? Izuku went on, his voice softening with something that sounded like pity. All Might. The symbol of peace. A man of unparalleled strength and charisma. He sold the world a beautiful, intoxicating dream, that as long as one strong person was there to smile and punch the bad guys, everything would be okay. Toshinori Yagi choked on a ragged breath, his frail body trembling. He felt as if Izuku's words were physically stripping away his legacy, his very identity, layer by painful layer. But it was a lie, Izuku stated, his voice hardening again. A beautiful lie. It wasn't a solution, it was a painkiller. All Might's presence didn't solve the underlying problems of our society, it just masked the symptoms. He created a culture of dependency, teaching us to look to the sky for a savior instead of looking at the broken systems at our feet. He was the ultimate brand, and his retirement exposed the truth. The peace he offered was built on the shoulders of one man, and it was just as fragile. He looked away from the camera for a moment, as if collecting his thoughts, before his piercing green eyes locked back on. For decades, this system has churned on, a self-sustaining cycle of crisis and celebrity. And what has it given you? A world where children are judged at the age of 4 by a genetic lottery. A world where those with strong quirks are celebrated, and those with weak or villainous ones are ostracized. A world where your safety depends on the whims of the powerful. A world where your children can be deemed a necessary sacrifice to protect the status quo. This is the truth of our world, he said, his voice dropping to an intense, almost hypnotic level. The conflict is not between heroes and villains. That is merely the symptom. The true conflict, the true disease, is the quirk. The world went silent. It was a leap in logic so vast, so extreme, that it stunned billions into speechlessness. Quirks, Izuku elaborated, his tone that of a physician delivering a terminal diagnosis. The very source of this chaos. They are a biological arms race with no finish line. They create an inherent, inescapable inequality. They are the reason for the jealousy, the fear, the ambition, and the hatred that fuels this endless cycle. A man who can breathe fire will always be a threat to a man who cannot. A woman who can read minds will always be feared. As long as quirks exist, true peace, true equality, is a mathematical impossibility. He paused, letting the weight of his declaration settle. The heroes will not fix this. They cannot. They are a product of the disease, and their only purpose is to manage its symptoms. They will never cure it, because to do so would be to render themselves obsolete. They will continue to fight your wars, to protect the broken system, because their livelihoods depend on it. But I am not a hero anymore. The words were a final, definitive schism. In the task force room, Uraraka finally broke, tears streaming down her face. No, Deku-kun, no. So what is the solution? Izuku asked the world, his expression softening into one of grim, paternalistic resolve. What is the cure for a world so sick with power? It is not another punch. It is not another symbol. It is not another war. The cure is salvation. I have spent the last 6 months not in hiding, but in preparation. I have seen the rot at the core of our world, and I have found the means to remove it. I am not here to rule you. I am not here to harm you. I am here to save you from yourselves. I will create a new world. A world of absolute order and true equality. A world where no child is born with the power to incinerate a city, and no child is born powerless and left to be mocked. A world where the concepts of hero and villain are meaningless, relegated to the history books like ancient, barbaric myths. I will not take your lives. I will take the cause of your suffering. I will remove the quirk factor from every man, woman, and child on this planet. The sheer, breathtaking audacity of the statement was a physical shockwave. Erase quirks? All of them? It was unthinkable. It was genocide on a genetic level. The heroes will try to stop me, Izuku said, a flicker of something like regret in his eyes. My former friends, my teachers, they are still bound to the old, failed system. They will call me a villain, a monster. They will fight to protect the world that is, not the world that should be. And I will have to defeat them. For their own good. For your good. He stood up straighter, his entire demeanor shifting. The analytical lecturer was gone, replaced by something colder, something absolute. A prophet delivering his final, unshakable commandment. The name you knew me by, Deku, was a name given to me to mean useless. It was a brand of mockery that I tried to redefine. But I am done redefining the past. I am here to build the future. He raised a hand, and green, crackling energy, one for all, began to dance around his fist. The vestiges screamed in his mind, but their voices were a distant storm, powerless against the hurricane of his will. This power I wield is called One for All. It was meant to be a legacy, a torch passed down through generations of heroes to be a symbol of hope. But that was its flaw. It was a symbol, not a solution. Under my guidance, it will finally achieve its true purpose. It will no longer be a torch to be passed. It will be the fire that purges the world and forges it anew. His cold, green eyes stared out at the billions watching, and he delivered his final, terrifying proclamation. Therefore, I am renouncing the past. I am no longer Izuku Midoriya. I am no longer Deku. From this day forward, I am the instrument of your salvation. I am the singular will that will bring peace to this world. I am the power that is for the good of all. My name is One for All. The broadcast cut out. The screens went black. For a full 10 seconds, the world was utterly silent. The hum of life had stopped. And then, the screaming began. In the Tanaka household, Akari was crying, her small body shaking. Her father held her, his own face a mask of fear and disbelief, staring at the blank screen that had just broadcast the death of his daughter's dreams. In the task force headquarters, Bakugo finally moved. With a guttural roar of pure, animalistic fury, he lunged forward and punched the main monitor. His fist, even without his quirk fully active, shattered the massive screen, sending a shower of glass and sparks across the console. He stood there, panting, his chest heaving, his knuckles bleeding, staring at his own fractured reflection in the dead screen. He wasn't just angry, he was heartbroken, and his heartbreak manifested as incandescent rage. In his small apartment, Toshinori Yagi had collapsed, his frail body slumping out of his chair and onto the floor. He wasn't coughing blood. He wasn't crying. He was just empty, a hollowed-out husk of a man, staring at the ceiling as the legacy he had given his life to build was formally declared an instrument of global tyranny by the only son he had ever known. And deep beneath the city, the man who now called himself One for All turned away from the camera. The cold, absolute mask was still in place. They will be mobilizing now, Glitch said, her voice trembling slightly. The sheer scale of what they had just done was finally hitting her. Every hero, every military on the planet. They'll be coming for us. Let them come, he said, his voice calm. He walked towards a large, metal door at the back of the room. They are merely the death throes of a dying world. He opened the door, revealing a vast, cavernous space beyond. Lined up in neat, disciplined rows were hundreds of figures, all clad in dark, functional uniforms. They were disillusioned ex-heroes, quirk users who had been ostracized by society, ordinary people who had been failed by the system one too many times. They saw him and snapped to perfect, silent attention. They were not a league of villains. They were an army of true believers. His war had just begun. The world reacted to the broadcast not as a monolith, but as a fractured mirror, each piece reflecting a different shade of terror, confusion, and a terrifying, burgeoning hope. Governments condemned the act, labeling One for All the single greatest terrorist threat in human history. Hero organizations across the globe held emergency summits, forming an unprecedented international coalition. The media went into a frenzy, plastering Izuku Midoriya's face, one moment the smiling hero, the next the cold-eyed ideologue, across every conceivable platform. They called him the fallen symbol, the architect of ruin, the final villain. But in the shadowed corners of society, in the places where the light of hero society cast the darkest shadows, the message was received differently. It was not a threat, it was a promise. For those who had been chewed up and spit out by the system, for those who had been deemed acceptable losses, for those whose quirks were curses rather than gifts, the broadcast was a revelation. It was the first time someone with true power had not just acknowledged their pain but had validated it, had given it a name and a face, and had offered a solution as radical and absolute as their own despair. And from these shadows, they began to emerge, drawn to the chillingly logical gospel of the man who now called himself One for All. He was no longer a ghost. He was a beacon, and his flock was beginning to gather. The first to answer the call was a ghost of a different sort. In a dank, unlit cell in the deepest, most secure block of Tartarus, a man sat in meditative stillness. His body was a road map of scars, his face a grotesque rictus held together by staples and sheer, unyielding will. His name was Kaizo Makaguro, but the world knew him as Stain, the hero killer. He had been captured, imprisoned, but his ideology had festered in the underworld like a potent virus. He had watched the broadcast on the small, flickering monitor in his cell, the guards having deemed it a fitting psychological torture for all inmates. But for Stain, it was not torture. It was vindication. As Izuku Midoriya spoke, Stain's scarred, unblinking eyes widened. He heard the boy, the one he had deemed a true hero in that bloody Hosu alleyway, echo his own convictions, but magnified to a global, apocalyptic scale. The fakes. The corruption. The for-profit heroes. The rotten foundation. Midoriya had seen it all, just as he had. But where Stain had sought to purge the system with a knife, Midoriya sought to erase its very cause with the power of a god. When the broadcast ended, a slow, rasping sound filled the cell. It was laughter. A dry, grating, unholy sound of pure, unadulterated joy. The guards outside the cell exchanged uneasy glances. The hero killer hadn't made a sound in years. That night, the alarms of Tartarus screamed. Not from a mass breakout, not from a riot. From a single, targeted breach. The walls of Stain's cell, forged from meters of cork-reinforced steel, were simply torn apart as if they were wet paper. One for All stood in the gaping hole, green lightning crackling around him in the oppressive dark. He was not wearing a tactical suit, but a simple black cloak, his face cast in shadow. The prison's automated defense systems, turrets, sonic emitters, energy fields, lay in twisted, smoking ruin behind him. He had not bypassed them. He had walked through them. Stain slowly rose to his feet, his gaze intense. He studied the young man before him, the one who had inherited All Might's power, and now wore it like a funeral shroud. You have the eyes of a true savior, Stain rasped, his voice rough from disuse. The will to do what is necessary. You seek to create a world where my work is no longer needed. Your work was inefficient, Kaizo Makaguro, One for All replied, his voice calm and devoid of emotion. He did not call him Stain. He used his real name, a gesture of understanding that went deeper than any offer of alliance. Culling the sick does not cure the plague. I intend to eradicate the disease at its source. The fakes will stand against you, Stain warned, a feral grin spreading across his scarred face. Their vanity and greed will not allow them to surrender their place in the sun. I am aware, One for All said. That is why I require individuals who understand the nature of the rot. Individuals who are not afraid to cut it out. He extended a hand. He was not asking. He was offering a place in the new world. Stain looked at the outstretched hand, then back at the cold, determined eyes of the young man. He saw no hesitation, no doubt. He saw only the absolute conviction of a messiah. This was the hero he had been waiting for. The one worthy of culling all the others. I will be your scalpel, Stain pledged, bowing his head not in subjugation, but in reverence. The second to join was a hawk with broken wings. Lady Nagant, once the Hero Public Safety Commission's most celebrated sniper and covert operative, languished in her own special wing of Tartarus. Her cell was a cage of despair, her spirit as broken as the trust she had placed in the hero system. She had been their loyal dog, their perfect weapon, the smiling assassin who eliminated threats to their carefully manicured peace. And when her conscience finally broke, when she questioned the blood on their hands, they had locked her away and erased her from history. She had watched the broadcast with a cynical, bitter smirk. Midoriya was just another idealist destined to be crushed. Or so she thought. Her cell door didn't explode. It simply dissolved. One for All phased through the wall, using the fourth user's quirk, Danger Sense, to navigate the prison's internal security grids without tripping a single silent alarm. He stood before her, a specter of the very system that had created and destroyed them both. Kana Tsutsumi, he said, his voice soft. The HPSC's greatest sin. A true hero, forced to become a killer to protect a lie. Negan's eyes, dull with years of imprisonment, sharpened. He knew her name. He knew her story. Come to gloat, little hero? She sneered, her voice a cocktail of venom and exhaustion. To see what happens when you fly too close to the sun? I am not a hero, he corrected her gently. And I have no intention of flying near the sun. I intend to blot it out. He laid out his case with cold, irrefutable logic. He presented her with evidence, files he had already liberated from the HPSC's deepest archives. He showed her the kill orders she had followed, and next to them, the political and corporate gains the HPSC had made from each assassination. He showed her that her necessary evils were nothing more than strategic moves in a corporate takeover masquerading as national security. He didn't just tell her she was a pawn. He showed her the entire chessboard. You were a weapon used to maintain a corrupt peace, he said, his voice laced with a quiet, understanding anger. I am offering you a chance to be a weapon that forges a true one. Join me, and you will never again have to question the righteousness of your target. Our target is the system itself. Nagant stared at him, at the evidence displayed on a holographic projector he'd produced from his gauntlet. For years, her guilt and cynicism had been a shield. She believed in nothing and no one. But this boy, he wasn't offering her a chance at redemption. He was offering her something far more seductive, revenge. Justice. A chance to aim her rifle at the ones who had truly pulled the trigger all those years. What's your plan? She asked, her voice stripped of its earlier sneer, replaced by a dangerous curiosity. The heroes are an army of symbols, he explained. They derive their power from public trust and their own iconic status. We will dismantle them, not just physically, but ideologically. We will show the world their flaws, their hypocrisy, their corruption. We will make the people see that their saviors are their jailers. And for that, I need a sniper who can shatter a symbol from a mile away. A slow, dangerous smile spread across Lady Nagant's face for the first time in years. It was the smile of a predator being handed a rifle and pointed towards a flock of unsuspecting prey. Give me a gun, she said. And tell me where to aim. While his new lieutenants were being recruited, the world was responding. One for All's message had not just created enemies, it had created converts. They were a scattered, desperate diaspora of the disillusioned. There was the young woman in Esuha City whose transformation quirk turned her into a hideous, monstrous beast. She had been hounded, feared, and attacked her entire life, despite never harming a soul. Her hero application had been rejected with the note, quirk unsuitable for public image. She saw One for All's broadcast and wept with relief. A world without quirks was a world where she would finally be seen as herself. She packed a bag and used her tracking skills to head towards Muzurifu, the epicenter of the new movement. There was the ex-sidekick from Endeavor's agency, a man who had retired with severe burns and even more severe psychological trauma after being used as training fodder for the ambitious hero. He had received a meager pension and a gag order for his silence. He saw the broadcast and felt a surge of righteous fury. He downloaded every piece of incriminating data he had secretly kept and set out to find the one person who would use it. There were entire communities of people with so-called useless quirks, who were treated as second-class citizens. There were scientists and engineers whose research into quirk regulation had been suppressed by the HPSC, which feared it would destabilize the hero economy. There were ordinary parents whose children had been killed in the crossfire of a flashy hero battle, only to be told their loss was an unavoidable consequence of heroic action. They were doctors, teachers, technicians, and laborers. They were not villains. They were simply people who had looked at the world the heroes had built, and found it wanting. They began to move, communicating through encrypted forums and dead drops, following whispers and rumors. They called themselves the Salvation Front, and they were all heading towards a single, secret destination. The headquarters of the Salvation Front was a masterstroke of logistical genius and symbolic irony. It was a massive, decommissioned underground storm shelter and transit hub beneath the ruins of the Kamino Ward, the very place where All Might had fought All for One in their final, system-shattering battle. It was a graveyard of the old world, and One for All was turning it into the womb of the new. He had found the location using old municipal blueprints and his own analytical skills. Over the past 6 months, he and his first few recruits, disgruntled engineers and hackers, had secretly recommissioned the facility. They reactivated the geothermal power generators, established a closed-loop hydroponics farm for food and an advanced water filtration system. They used stolen HPSC schematics to build state-of-the-art training facilities, medical bays, and communication centers, all shielded from any form of electronic surveillance. The place wasn't a hideout. It was a subterranean fortress, a self-sustaining city-state. He called it Eden. As his new followers arrived, they were not greeted by a chaotic mob, but by a structured, organized society. Each person was vetted, their skills assessed, and they were assigned a role. The sidekick with the burn scars was placed in charge of training new recruits in counter-hero tactics. The woman with the monstrous transformation quirk was made a lead scout, her fearsome appearance now a valued asset for intimidation and reconnaissance. The hackers and engineers formed the backbone of Glitch's tech and intel division. One for All addressed them not as a cackling villain or a charismatic cult leader, but as a calm, logical commander. He moved among them, speaking to them, learning their names and their stories. He listened to their pain, validated their anger, and then channeled it into a focused purpose. He didn't offer them power. He offered them a world where power was irrelevant. His leadership was absolute, built on a foundation of intellectual and strategic superiority. He could outthink any tactician, outmaneuver any hero, and his personal power was a constant, awe-inspiring reminder of his capability. But his true power lay in his message. He had given a name to their suffering, the quirk-based societal paradox, and he had given them a tangible, final solution. Discipline was paramount. This was not the League of Villains, a dysfunctional family of chaotic personalities. This was a paramilitary force. They wore simple, dark green and black uniforms. They addressed each other by their assigned roles. There was no infighting, no jockeying for position. There was only the mission. They were not here to destroy. They were here to save. But as his army grew in the world of the living, a rebellion was brewing in the world of his mind. One night, as he stood on a high gantry overlooking the main assembly hall of Eden, watching his followers train with a quiet satisfaction, the vestiges of One for All made their move. They had been whispering, pleading, but now they marshaled their collective will for a full-blown psychic assault. His mind was ripped from the gantry and plunged into the familiar, dreamlike space of One for All's consciousness. But the space, usually a shifting, ethereal realm, was now a storm. Dark clouds churned, and phantom lightning, born of their collective rage and sorrow, flashed in the void. All 8 of the previous users stood before him, their forms more solid and furious than he had ever seen them. "This has gone far enough, Ninth!" roared Yoichi Shigaraki, the very first user, his usually gentle face contorted with anger. "This is not what my brother and I fought for. This power was meant to be a symbol of defiance against tyranny, not the instrument of it. You speak of salvation, but you are leading them to ruin." Haikid Shinomori, the 4th user, hissed, his danger sense manifesting as a painful psychic shriek in Izuku's mind. "You are twisting our gifts, perverting their purpose." At the forefront stood Nana Shimura, her form radiating a grief so powerful it was a physical force. Tears streamed down her face, but her eyes were hard as steel. "I passed this power to Tashinori to give people hope, Izuku. So that no other child would have to see their family die like I did. And you? You are using it to hold the entire world hostage. You are becoming the very thing we fought against. You are becoming All for One." The name struck him like a physical blow. For a moment, the cold certainty in his own mental space wavered. He saw a flash of the monster with no face, the man who stole and hoarded power for his own sake. He grit his teeth, his own psychic form solidifying against their assault. "You are wrong," he said, his mental voice a cold, sharp blade cutting through their emotional storm. "All for One hoarded power to dominate. To control. I am not taking power. I am erasing it. I am enforcing equality." It is the exact opposite of his goal. By destroying the very thing that makes people unique? Daigoro Banjo countered, stepping forward. By taking away their choice? That is not equality, boy, that is obliteration. Choice is an illusion when the options are predetermined by a genetic lottery. One for All shot back, his frustration finally showing. A child who can create explosions has a different choice in life than a child who can extend his fingernails. That is not choice, it is destiny. I am giving them back true choice, a world where their worth is defined by their character, not their quirk. He looked at Nana Shimura, a flicker of the old Izuku surfacing, a hint of the boy who had so deeply admired her legacy. You wanted to save everyone, Nana-san. I do too, but I have the courage to admit what you and All Might never could. It cannot be done in the world as it is. It requires a fundamental reset. A global cure. My methods are extreme because the disease is absolute. His conviction was like a fortress wall. Their pleas, their anger, their logic, it all crashed against him and broke. They were relics of a failed ideology, ghosts clinging to a world that had already proven their methods insufficient. He saw their arguments as the desperate cries of a past that refused to die. With a monumental effort of will, he seized control of the mental space. He reached out, not with malice, but with an iron grip of pure control, and began to force them back. I am the ninth user, his mental voice boomed, the dreamscape itself shaking with his power. This power is mine now. Its purpose is my purpose. You will not stand in my way. The vestiges cried out as he suppressed them, their forms becoming transparent, their voices fading into muted whispers. Nana Shimura's heartbroken face was the last thing he saw before he forced them all down, deep into the recesses of the quirk, silencing them. He was alone in his own mind once more. He opened his eyes, the real world snapping back into focus. He was still on the gantry, overlooking his army. Not a second had passed. His control was absolute. But as he looked down at his own hand, he saw it was trembling slightly. A single, cold tear traced a path down his cheek, a phantom echo of Nana's sorrow. He wiped it away with an angry, impatient gesture. There was no room for sentiment. There was no room for doubt. The flock had been gathered. The fortress had been built. The army was ready. The next stage of his plan was about to begin. It was time to start breaking the symbols.